It began on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning. The sky was clear, the sun warm but not yet oppressive, and the neighborhood still wrapped in the calm of early hours. The rhythmic chirping of sparrows floated through the air as the narrator, our homeowner, stepped outside to collect the newspaper. That's when they saw it. A crisp white envelope tucked under the edge of the front doormat, stamped with the unmistakable crimson logo of the Homeowners Association. It wasn't unusual for the HOA to send letters, sometimes about upcoming meetings, sometimes about lawn maintenance reminders, but the weight of this envelope felt different. The paper was thick, the folds sharp, and the return address was not the association's general office, but that compliance committee. The mailbox sat just a few feet away, standing proudly on the curb. It was a piece of craftsmanship, hand-painted, with intricate wooden trim and a polished brass flag. Over the years, it had become something of a landmark. Neighbors pointed out to guests. Delivery drivers complimented it. It wasn't loud or garish, just unique, reflecting the care and personality of its owner. The letter inside was short, blunt, and clinical. It stated that the mailbox was non-conforming to community design standards and was in violation of Section 4, Paragraph 7 of the HOA bylaws. It gave two options: replace it with an approved standard model within 10 days, or face daily fines until compliance was achieved. The reasoning, according to the letter, was that the mailbox detracted from neighborhood uniformity. The words were sterile, but the message was clear. The HOA wanted it gone. It wasn't the first time the homeowner had heard complaints from the association. Over the years, small disputes had emerged, warnings about seasonal decorations being too elaborate, notices about flower beds exceeding allowed dimensions. But those skirmishes had always been resolved without much escalation. This time felt different. This was not a warning. It was an ultimatum. The mind began to churn. Questions arose. Why now? Who complained? Was this a personal vendetta from someone on the board? But in the HOA world, motives often are behind a facade of rules and bylaws. The day passed in a haze of irritation. The mailbox wasn't just a functional object. It was a statement of individuality in a neighborhood obsessed with sameness. To replace it with a dull, mass-produced model felt like surrender. But non-compliance meant paying hundreds of dollars in fines each month, a steady financial drain designed to force submission. That night, while the rest of the street slept in tidy conformity, a plan began to take shape. It would require patience, research, and a little creativity. The HOA had rules, but rules worked both ways. If there was a clause that could be used against them, it could be found. And if the HOA wanted to fight, they were about to get one. By the end of the week, the homeowner had read every page of the HOA bylaws. The fine print revealed something interesting. The only restriction on mailbox size and design was that it must not obstruct traffic visibility and must be maintained in good repair. There was no specific mandate on style beyond respecting the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood, a phrase so vague it could be interpreted in multiple ways. The seed of an idea began to grow. If the HOA wanted conformity, they wouldn't get it. Instead, they would get a mailbox so grand, so over the top, and yet so perfectly within the rules that they couldn't legally touch it. That idea took root. The homeowner began sketching, gathering inspiration from medieval castles, historic fortresses, and ornate architecture. Stone, brick, and wrought iron would combine to create a monument to defiance, a mailbox fortress. The next step was to make it official. Before any construction began, the homeowner filed a mailbox maintenance and upgrade notice, a formality in the HOA's process that only required basic details. In the section asking for a project description, they simply wrote, replacing mailbox with structure built from durable materials, in compliance with height and visibility standards. Technically true, yet omitting the fact that the structure would be unlike anything the neighborhood had ever seen. Days later, the notice was returned stamped, approved. That single word was the green light. Materials were ordered: decorative stone blocks, miniature turrets, arched doorways, and custom-carved details. The mailbox would not be hidden in this fortress. It would be the drawbridge, lowering to reveal the slot for letters. The project would take weeks, and the HOA would likely notice before it was finished. But the homeowner was ready for that. Once they saw the approval stamp, their leverage would be undeniable. And as the first pallet of stone arrived at the curb, it was clear this was no longer just about a mailbox. This was about standing up to the suffocating sameness of the HOA's control. It was about proving that individuality could survive even under the watchful eyes of those who despised it. By the end of that first week, the base of the fortress was already taking shape, and curious neighbors began to slow their walks to watch. Some smiled, others whispered, and somewhere behind one of those identical front doors, someone from the HOA was almost certainly planning their next move. The battle had begun. The first week of construction brought an energy to the quiet street that hadn't seen in years. Each morning, delivery trucks arrived, unloading stacks of stone and boxes of ornate fixtures onto the driveway. The sound of chisels, saws, and hammers echoed down the cul-de-sac. For a neighborhood accustomed to the soft hum of lawnmowers and the occasional leaf blower, this was a shock to the system. The base of the structure rose steadily from the earth. Layer by layer, the stone wall took form, wrapping around the original footprint of the mailbox but extending upward and outward. The foundation was built to last. Reinforced concrete footings, carefully leveled stone, and mortar lines so clean they looked like something out of a historical restoration project. The mailbox itself, temporarily removed, sat on a workbench in the garage, awaiting its new home inside the fortress. It would be framed in a miniature archway, just large enough to hold letters and small packages, but surrounded by decorative stone that gave it the appearance of a grand medieval gate. By the second week, the lower walls were complete, and the project began to reveal its true form. 2 small turrets emerged on either side, each capped with conical roofs made from weatherproof slate tiles. Tiny slit-style windows were cut into the stone, purely decorative, but giving the impression that this mailbox could withstand a siege. Neighbors who once ignored the mailbox now stopped daily to watch the progress. Some offered quiet words of encouragement. Others simply stared in disbelief. Children from down the street began riding their bikes past more often, curious to see what new feature had been added each day. It didn't take long for the HOA to notice. A white SUV marked property compliance rolled slowly past the house one afternoon, its driver taking photos from a window. A few days later, another envelope appeared on the doormat. But this one was different. It wasn't a fine. It was a request for project clarification, asking for additional details and citing concerns about compatibility with neighborhood standards. The homeowner read the letter twice, then calmly placed it on the kitchen counter. The approval stamp from the original project form still sat in a drawer. Every feature of the fortress was within the legal height limit, setback requirements, and visibility rules. There was no clause against ornamentation, no ban on turrets, no prohibition against using stone. The HOA could be concerned all they wanted. Concern didn't override approval. Construction continued without pause. By the third week, the fortress had become impossible to ignore. The drawbridge-style mailbox door was installed, complete with small wrought iron hinges and a decorative brass handle. Above it, a carved stone crest displayed the house number in bold, elegant font. Along the base, flower beds were planted with vibrant seasonal blooms, softening the structure's medieval feel with a touch of garden beauty. It wasn't just a mailbox anymore, it was a landmark. Cars slowed down, pedestrians took photos, and one local blogger even posted about it online. Castle on Willow Creek, the headline read, accompanied by pictures of the still unfinished structure. But while public fascination grew, tension with the HOA deepened. Another white SUV visit, another round of photos, and another letter, this one warning of a possible aesthetic compliance review. The wording was vague, as if the association was fishing for something they could use as leverage. Inside the homeowner's mind, the plan remained clear. Build according to rules, document every step, and leave no opening for legal action. The HOA thrived on intimidation, but intimidation only worked if you left room for fear. By the fourth week, the finishing touches were underway. Small lantern-style lights were installed on either side of the main arch, wired discreetly so they illuminated the fortress at night. The turrets received decorative battlements, purely cosmetic, but giving the structure an authentic medieval silhouette. At dusk, with the lights glowing softly against the stone, the fortress looked even more imposing. It stood as a silent challenge to the HOA, an immovable monument to individuality in a neighborhood built on sameness. Whispers spread through the block. Some neighbors wondered how the HOA would respond. Others quietly admitted they admired the audacity. Even those who disliked the fortress had to admit. Every inch was meticulously maintained and undeniably within the bylaws. As the final stones were laid, the homeowner stepped back to admire the work. It was exactly as envisioned, a perfect blend of artistry, defiance, and legality. The next morning, another SUV rolled by. This time, the driver didn't just take photos, they parked. The compliance officer stepped out, clipboard in hand, and began walking slowly around the fortress, jotting notes, inspecting details. For a moment, the homeowner wondered if this would be the day the real fight began. But the officer never approached the door. Instead, they got back in the SUV and drove away without a word. Later that week, a new letter arrived. It was just 3 sentences long, but the tone was colder than before. The HOA was reviewing recent construction for compliance verification and would issue a formal determination within 10 business days. 10 days. The countdown had begun. The 10-day countdown was a strange mix of anticipation and unease. Each day, the homeowner tended to the fortress, sweeping stray leaves from the flower beds, polishing the brass mailbox door, and checking the stonework for even the smallest imperfections. Everything was flawless. Every inch stood in compliance with the rules. And yet, the HOA's silence felt like the calm before a storm. On the 6th day, the letter arrived. It was thicker than the previous ones, printed on formal letterhead, and delivered via certified mail. Inside was a 4-page document titled Preliminary Notice of Violation. The language was dense, full of citations, subsections, and claims that the fortress failed to meet the neighborhood's aesthetic cohesion and posed a potential distraction to drivers. Buried in the middle of the 2nd page was the real sting, a demand for removal or modification within 30 days to avoid daily fines. The homeowner read it twice, then a 3rd time, scanning for any actual rule that had been broken. But there it was, the same strategy HOAs use time and time again, vague interpretations of subjective standards. The bylaws never defined aesthetic cohesion, and there was no measurable definition for potential distraction. It was a kind of language designed to intimidate, not to enforce. By sunset that day, the neighborhood grapevine had already passed along the news. Some whispered sympathy. Others barely hid their schadenfreude. A few even predicted that the HOA would win. After all, they always did. But not this time. The homeowner began gathering ammunition for the fight ahead. Every step of the construction process had been documented. Receipts, photos, and the original written approval stamped and signed. Neighbors who had expressed admiration for Fortress were discreetly asked if they'd be willing to put that in writing. A handful agreed, eager to see someone stand up to the board. Still, the HOA didn't sit idle. On the 9th day, another white SUV arrived, this time accompanied by 2 board members carrying clipboards. They didn't knock or speak, just walked the perimeter, taking close-up photos of every angle, even crouching near the base of the stone walls as if searching for hidden flaws. The following week, the HOA's tactics escalated. A mass email was sent to all residents warning about unapproved construction projects and urging members to report any irregularities to the board immediately. It was a thinly veiled attempt to rally the neighborhood against the fortress. And yet, the fortress only seemed to grow more popular. On weekends, people from outside the neighborhood drove in just to see it. Photos spread on social media, tagged with captions like #MailboxCastle and #HOAProof. Local news outlets began calling it the Stone Standoff, and one even requested an interview. But while public opinion was shifting, the HOA doubled down. 2 more letters followed, each more aggressive than the last, accusing the homeowner of willful noncompliance and threatening legal action. They hinted at fines that could stack daily, reaching into the thousands within a few months. It was no longer about a mailbox. It was about control. Late one evening, the homeowner stood at the edge of the driveway, looking up at the fortress under the glow of the lantern lights. The stone shimmered faintly, the turrets casting sharp shadows against a quiet street. It didn't look like a violation. It didn't look like a hazard. It looked like a statement, a refusal to be bullied into bland uniformity. The next morning, the homeowner filed an official appeal with the HOA, demanding a formal hearing. Every document, photo, and receipt was copied and bound in a thick folder. A calm, concise cover letter cited specific sections of the bylaws, pointing out that the fortress met all measurable requirements. It ended with one simple sentence. You approve this project in writing. Now you will honor that approval. The date for the hearing was set. In 2 weeks, the homeowner would walk into the HOA meeting room and face the board directly. And this time, it wouldn't just be about defending a mailbox. It would be about sending a message to every homeowner who had ever been intimidated into silence. The evening of the hearing arrived like a thundercloud. The homeowner had spent the past 2 weeks preparing, combing through every clause of the HOA bylaws until the words burned into memory. The fortress had been polished to perfection, the lanterns cleaned, the stonework gleaming under the fading light. No loose gravel, no chipped mortar, nothing the board could twist into a violation. The community center was already buzzing when the homeowner arrived. Rows of folding chairs lined the room, most already occupied by residents. Some had come out of curiosity, others to quietly cheer on the one neighbor daring to take on the board. The front of the room held a long table draped in a navy cloth, where 5 HOA board members sat in rigid posture. Their binders were stacked neatly in front of them, each marked with colored tabs like weapons waiting to be drawn. The HOA president, an older man with a deep frown line etched permanently across his face, tapped the microphone. His voice came through the speakers clipped and cold. He opened with procedural formality, reading the complaint into the record. Unauthorized structural changes, potential safety hazards, violation of neighborhood aesthetics. Each phrase was delivered with deliberate weight, as though reading a criminal charge. Then came the photographs. In large prints of the mailbox fortress were propped on easels for everyone to see. Close-up shots of the stone walls, the brass mailbox door, the turrets, all framed like evidence in a trial. The president spoke of disruption to neighborhood harmony, using abstract language that carried no concrete rule behind it. When it was time for the defense, the homeowner rose slowly, the folder of evidence in hand. There was no need for raised voices. The facts would do the work. First came the stamped, signed written approval from the HOA's own architectural committee, a document the board could not deny. Then, the series of photographs documenting every stage of the build, each showing compliance with the original, approved design. Finally, the receipts, stone, mortar, lighting, every item purchased legally and within code. The homeowner laid them out on the table, one by one, like a silent counterattack. The murmurs from the audience grew louder with each piece of evidence. Even a few board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Then came the witnesses. 3 neighbors, 2 in person, 1 via written statement, attested that the mailbox was not only compliant, but had improved the look of the street. One even noted that several homes had seen increased interest from buyers since photos of the fortress had gone viral. The president tried to push back, leaning on the vague, aesthetic cohesion clause. But when pressed to define it in measurable terms, his words faltered. Without a clear standard, the claim dissolved into opinion. And opinion wasn't enforceable under their own bylaws. The tension in the room shifted. The board had started the meeting with confidence, but now the balance was tipping. The audience could feel it. This was no longer the HOA dictating terms. It was a homeowner holding the HOA accountable to its own rules. The hearing ended with a promise on the board to deliberate and issue a decision within 10 business days. But the president's tight jaw and clipped tone made one thing clear. They weren't ready to give up. As the homeowner walked out of the room, the air outside felt cooler, sharper. Neighbors approached quietly, offering quick words of support, some with smiles that suggested they were rooting for more than just a win. They wanted to see the fortress stand as a symbol. The battle had been fought in words and evidence that night, but wars with HOAs rarely ended in a single meeting. The next move was theirs, and if the board's history was any indication, it wouldn't be a clean fight. The board decision letter arrived exactly on the 10th business day, sealed in an official HOA envelope. At first glance, it looked like a victory. The charges from the original complaint were dismissed pending compliance verification. But the language was carefully crafted, slippery in its phrasing. The last sentence revealed the trap. The HOA reserved the right to reopen the matter should any additional issues arise with the structure or surrounding property. The homeowner had seen enough of their tactics to know what this meant. It wasn't over. It was a warning. Within a week, the first random inspection occurred. A board member appeared at the property unannounced, walking the perimeter with a clipboard, jotting notes while peering at the stonework as though searching for microscopic cracks. A few days later, another letter arrived, this time claiming that the mailbox lighting violated light pollution regulations. It was absurd. The soft lantern glow was less intrusive than most porch lights on the street. When that complaint failed to stick, they shifted tactics again. Suddenly, the HOA declared that the landscaping around the mailbox fortress was out of uniform with the neighborhood's appearance. The flower bed, which had been there for years before the mailbox was built, was now labeled a non-approved modification. Every letter came with deadlines, short ones, calculated to force quick responses. Miss a single deadline, and the HOA could declare noncompliance, triggering fines and even legal action. It was harassment dressed in official language, designed to exhaust patience and resources. The homeowner responded to each one with meticulous documentation, measurements of the lantern's light levels, dated photograph of the landscaping, proving it had been unchanged for years, copies of old newsletters showing similar flower beds in other yards, untouched by the board's scrutiny. Each rebuttal was sent by certified mail, signed and time-stamped, so there could be no claim of lost responses. But the retaliation didn't stop at paperwork. Rumors began circulating through the neighborhood. Whispers that the fortress had been built without permits, that it was attracting unwanted attention from outsiders, that it would hurt property values. These stories were spread quietly, but they carried the sour tone of a campaign meant to turn neighbors against one of their own. Yet something unexpected happened. The fortress had become more than just a mailbox. It was now a landmark. Drivers slowed to take photos. A local blog featured it under most unique homes in the city. Even a regional news crew came to film a short segment. What the HOA intended as a pressure campaign had, ironically, made the mailbox even more famous. And with that fame came support. Strangers left kind notes tucked into the mailbox door. Neighbors dropped by with coffee, sharing stories of their own battles with the board. The homeowner realized the fortress was no longer just a personal stand. It was a public one. But the HOA wasn't finished. Their next move was bold, even reckless. A letter arrived marked final notice. It stated that, after careful review, the board had voted to require the removal of the mailbox fortress entirely, citing irreversible disharmony with neighborhood standards. There was no clause in the bylaws to justify such a decision, but that didn't matter to them. They were gambling on the idea that most people wouldn't risk the time and cost of taking them to court. The letter gave 30 days to comply. Failure to do so, it warned, would result in daily fines and potential legal escalation. It was a declaration of war. And if they wanted a war, they were going to get one. The final notice, letter sat on the kitchen counter for exactly 1 day before the homeowner began preparing their counterattack. They had 30 days, and every hour of that window would be used with precision. The first step was assembling an airtight legal defense. The homeowner gathered every letter, every certified mail receipt, every time-stamped photograph of the mailbox fortress from the day construction began. They reviewed the HOA's bylaws line by line, highlighting passages that explicitly allowed decorative mailboxes, soft lighting, and personal landscaping. Most importantly, they found nothing, absolutely nothing, that granted the board authority to retroactively demand removal of an approved structure. Next came the community outreach. The homeowner began sharing their story openly, first with immediate neighbors, then through a post on a local social media group. The tale of the mailbox fortress versus the HOA spread fast. Support poured in from people who had faced their own HOA nightmares. Some even offered to testify on the homeowner's behalf, confirming the fortress had been built in full compliance with regulations. By the second week, the mailbox fortress had gone viral. Photos of it were circulating on Twitter, Facebook, and even Reddit. Memes appeared, showing the fortress labeled as the Last Stand or Castle HOA. Local TV crews returned, this time covering the conflict itself. The homeowner spoke calmly into the cameras, explaining the facts and the principles at stake. Not just their mailbox, but the right to personal expression within the bounds of the law. The HOA, and used to public scrutiny, began to splinter under the pressure. Some board members doubled down, giving terse, defensive statements to reporters. Others stayed silent, clearly uncomfortable with the optics of attacking something that had become a beloved neighborhood icon. As the 30-day deadline loomed, the homeowner's attorney filed an official injunction against the HOA, halting any attempt at removal until the matter could be decided in court. This move bought time and sent a clear message that intimidation would not work. Court day arrived on a crisp, cloudless morning. The homeowner walked in wearing a calm smile, their attorney carrying a thick binder of evidence. Across the aisle, the HOA's lawyer shuffled papers with visible unease. Over several hours, the judge reviewed every claim, every photograph, every section of the bylaws. The HOA's arguments unraveled quickly. They had approved the mailbox initially, their lighting and landscaping complaints were unfounded, and their disharmony claim was purely subjective. When the ruling came, it was decisive. The judge dismissed the HOA's demand for removal, declared the mailbox fortress entirely compliant, and issued a warning to the board about harassment under the guise of enforcement. In a final twist, the HOA was ordered to cover the homeowner's legal fees. The news spread like wildfire. Supporters cheered online. The fortress became more famous than ever, now seen as a symbol of standing up to overreach. Tourists came by to take pictures. Families posed in front of it for holiday cards, and one local artist even painted it for a community fair. In the weeks that followed, the HOA's power began to wane. The board president, who had spearheaded the campaign, quietly resigned. New members were elected, people who valued fairness over control. For the first time in years, the HOA's newsletter featured a photo of the mailbox fortress on the front page with the caption, "A unique landmark in our neighborhood." The homeowner had not only won, they had reshaped the culture of their community. The mailbox fortress still stood, lit by its soft lantern glow, a daily reminder that sometimes the best way to fight back is to build something so strong, so unshakable, that no amount of petty rules can tear it down. And as for the HOA's threats, they have been reduced a little more than a story, one that people would keep telling again and again for years to come.